What is up, guys? My name is Anson, and I'm coming at you with another episode of the Iron Obsession podcast, now in video format, as you can see. As you can also see on my left and right hand side, we are brought to you by Iron Rebel and Granite Nutrition. You can use code Anson10 to save on both of those and also to help support the show. Pretty excited to do this in video format now. It's going to take a little bit of a learning curve. You're going to see me look down a bit. I got some notes to keep me on track and stuff, but hopefully it becomes pretty seamless. So this is going to be another solo podcast with myself, but I am looking to bring on a guest either next week or the following week. I've already got 3 to 4 lined up. It's just about figuring out a schedule for when we can get together and do it. So that's going to be cool. I've got so far, I've got one bodybuilder who's in a similar stage as myself to talk with, a fellow beginning competitor. He's done one show, I believe, maybe 2, but I believe only 1. I've got a potentially 2 strong men, definitely 1, strong people rather, who's one their husband and wife, and then I also have a powerlifter lined up. I have potentially maybe another bodybuilder who's very experienced that I can ask, and yeah, those are most of the guests I have lined up. But anyways, let's move on to today's topic. This may be a little bit of a shorter episode. I don't know how much I can really go into detail about this. In my mind, it's pretty simple and straightforward. But I'm going to do my best to give you guys a decent amount of content. So the topic for today is the growth mindset. What does that mean? The growth mindset. To me, you can boil it down to one simple phrase. Always be willing to learn and improve. If you're always willing to learn and improve, you're going to grow. Not just in bodybuilding, not just in physical size, not just in strength, but your mind, your body, your soul, your finances, everything will grow so long as you always want to learn and improve in any little way that you can. Have that what they call a white belt mentality. You don't want to be the guy who thinks you know everything. And thankfully, I can say that has never been me. I always want to learn and improve. I'm always asking questions. I never think I know what I'm doing, almost to a fault. There have been times in my life where I was actually doing something correct and I changed it just because I was like, I learned this, maybe I can do that. And that can lead to issues in and of itself. So you do have to control that curiosity and want to learn. But it is a great tool, even if it can be kind of misused by yourself from time to time. For me, that's why I believe it is super, super important to have a coach, whether it be in bodybuilding or even a life coach, somebody who can just kind of always keep you on the rails, keep you smooth sailing, make sure you're going in the right direction. So having a white belt mentality means for me personally that in my free time, I'm always doing something to learn. In today's day and age where we have these phones in our pockets and headphones, everything, you should always be listening to something or reading something that can apply to your life or your passion. For me, that is usually podcasts. Occasionally audiobooks. I have just recently started to try to get a little bit into philosophy because of one of the podcasts I was listening to, the Thinking Man's podcast hosted by Joseph Percher and Tommy Stiles. Tommy Stiles talks a lot about Marcus Aurelius and his Stoicism philosophy. That's something that I'm going to start listening to on audiobook. I think it will be very interesting. I also do like to listen to audiobooks for history from time to time, just because I think there's a lot of lessons in history, particularly the big events like World War II, World War I, the Civil War, different economic collapses like the Great Depression. I think there's a lot of stuff that you can learn in these that may not necessarily apply to what you do in your life, but I think expanding your knowledge in general can just help get your brain thinking in a way that is productive. But some of the podcasts, because that is 90% of what I'm listening to is podcasts, some of the podcasts that I think are super, super entertaining and educational and provide a lot of value in my life personally are the One More Rep podcast hosted by Joseph Percher and Austin Brown, and also the Moses of Muscle. Those 3 do a great job hosting that podcast, and that is definitely my number 1 right now. Number 2 is actually a podcast, which I mentioned earlier, which I believe is unfortunately no longer in production. The Thinking Man's podcast with Joseph Percher and Tommy Stiles. Great wealth of knowledge there. There's so many episodes that you can go back and listen to there. There's also an entire channel called the Muscle Media Network. Yeah, the Muscle Media Network, I believe it is, and that hosts that podcast along with some other shows which are great. Also, Think Big Bodybuilding Media has a lot of different shows that are great. Scott McNally does a great job. I hope that I can one day aspire to even be 10% of that level of producer. You know, my amateur stuff on screen here is about the best I got right now. But so those are some of the podcasts that I like to listen to. There's a million other podcasts that I can mention about bodybuilding. It's the golden age for bodybuilding podcasts. People are more open, honest, and out there with what they're doing than ever before. Like when I was really kind of first start getting into bodybuilding around 2015, 2016, this was, I believe, like the Phil Heath era. Social media was around, but it wasn't how it is now. You could find workouts and stuff, but nowadays, if you have a person that you like in the fitness industry or the bodybuilding industry, all you got to do is go to their Instagram and you can see what their diet is. You can see what their training is like. You can see everything they're doing. You see how long they sleep for. People put almost too much information out there on social media nowadays. So that is something that you can do to learn as well, is to use social media as a tool but not as a crutch. And that's how I personally try to use it to the best of my ability. My Instagram feed is nothing but bodybuilding, motivation, recently a bit philosophy like I was talking about, and there's some spiritual stuff in there as well. Like, I am a big believer in your diet is not just what you eat. Your diet is what you consume. And we don't just consume food. We don't just drink water. We consume knowledge. Like, that is huge once you realize that. You also consume your environment. So, like I talked a little bit about in the last podcast, if you have people that are pulling you down in your life, you may need to get rid of them. And that can suck to do. I don't think I've ever had to do that, but I would be willing to if it was necessary. I'm pretty straight edge, and most of my friends are either pretty straight edge or they're not the type of people that would like push that lifestyle onto you if they do party a bit. But yeah, I would absolutely. If somebody was trying to influence me to do things that I did not think were right for me, I'd cut them off. Because to me, progress is way too important to sacrifice for pleasure. Because to me, the greatest pleasure there is progress. Because it's not just pleasure, it's this long-term thing that leads to this feeling of fulfillment, right? But if you can use social media in a way to truly make a positive impact on your life and be a good part of your diet, so to say, it can be great. Same with podcasts. Your environment, you want to cultivate that in a way to make progress and growth, but you have to be ever vigilant for those same things turning negative. Social media is the biggest example of this. Like I said, my feed is cultivated. If you have the power to cultivate your social media feed, if you see things you don't want to see, that's your fault. Like, you absolutely have the power to not see those things. And I'm going to let you in on a secret. Especially with Instagram, and I believe Facebook as well. I don't really use Facebook much. I'm more of an Instagram guy. Just that's kind of where bodybuilders tend to live. There's a mute function, because it can be awkward to unfollow someone. it can be awkward, right? But if somebody is negative and pulling you down, they're constantly complaining. They're constantly posting things you don't want to see. For example, I ain't gonna lie. If you know me and you were posting stuff about food when I was in prep, if you were a baker, whatever, you were probably muted during my contest prep, because I don't want to see that stuff. Like, it doesn't bother me now in an off season, but like when I'm 3 weeks out, I do not want to see your pastries, dude. It just is what it is. And I went back and unmuted all those people because they're people I care about. But yeah, you have to cultivate that, because if not, and that's not necessarily negative, but it can lead to a negative thought process in a prep scenario, for example. You have to cultivate that environment. The mute tool, even the unfollow tool, that's good as well. And generally speaking, not watching things that make you mad, not watching things that annoy you. People are wired to gravitate more towards negative than they are positive, right? And if you want to think about it from a evolutionary perspective, it makes sense, right? Because you get 2 positive interactions in a day, probably doesn't really lead to much of anything, right? But if you get a negative interaction, let's say, it's extreme, somebody stabs you, you're gonna get a lot more credence in your mind to that than you are the people who healed you. If somebody stabs you in the back, that's going to stick out more than the positive interactions are, for obvious reasons, right? Because it's dangerous. We are kind of programmed to always sense danger around us, and maybe even too much to a degree. So that's why I say don't watch things that you don't want to watch. And also, when it comes to the algorithm of social media, the more you watch these things, the more it's going to feed into that. So you have to cultivate that. So with the growth mindset, I think a really big part of it is also goal setting. And some people, like myself, I can personally do this. I've done this in my life. Some people can have a growth mindset and kind of more of a gray sense, to where there's not necessarily one big goal at the end, where you just have this more vast and almost ethereal goal that is not necessarily achievable. For me, that's just being the best version of myself. That's not really something you can see, touch, taste, or smell, right? It's just this thing. It's not a title. It's something that is never finished. And for me, that works. But I do also apply a lot of small goals in my life. And when it comes to goal setting, I think the biggest mistake people make when it comes to goal setting is getting ahead of yourself and setting these unrealistic and just way too big of goals to start off with. Again, in social media, you see it a lot in the bodybuilding industry. You have these kids who are 16, 18 years old, and I don't want to sound like an old fart. I'm only 25 myself. But man, if you're 16 or 18, you've probably not been lifting that long. For me, when I was 18, I'd been lifting for 3 years. It takes quite a bit of time to get a decent head on your shoulder about this thing, and some people are better than others. But if you're 16, 18, there should not be, quote unquote, the road to pro in anything you post, right? These big goals, I personally believe they're not goals, they're delusions. And the pro example may not be a very good example of that, because I do truly believe that in today's age of bodybuilding, it's pretty achievable to turn pro. I think if you have a good head on your shoulders and you're willing to put 5 to 10 years into this, almost anybody can turn pro, whether that be through men's physique, classic physique, bodybuilding, even masters. There's plenty of avenues. And then for women, there's also a lot of divisions as well. So there's plenty of avenues to turn pro. It's not that there's a lack of resource for being able to turn pro, which is why I say this. I say it more so because why are you going to try to sprint when you have not even crawled yet? Like, you're still a baby in your bodybuilding journey. You got to grow up a little bit, You gotta go from a baby to a toddler, to a child, to a teenager, to an adult, and then you mature into who you're going to be as a bodybuilder. You just can't get ahead of yourself. This sport is too long. This sport is too hard for you to set up goals that you may or may not reach within 10 years. Let's set some smaller goals first. If you want to have in the back of your mind, I want to turn pro, that's fine. But that's not necessarily something that you need to actualize through your words. You need to actualize it through your actions, right? You got to build a pro physique before you even talk about being pro. Now, you need to live like a pro before you even think about turning pro. These are all super, super important things that I try to apply to my life. I try to live like a professional bodybuilder because, of course, that's something if it's in the cards for me, I want it to happen. But regardless on if that does happen or not, it's what I love. So I want to be professional in the way I carry myself about going about bodybuilding, because it's that important to me. It's my passion. There's nothing more important to me than seeing that passion through. But with not getting ahead of yourself, where do you go? Well, set those small goals like I talked about. Little victories can add up to a mountain, right? So, like I said, from going from a baby bodybuilder to a toddler to a child to a teenager and so on, what that looks like to me, how I apply that to myself personally. Like I said in the first podcast, at my first show I placed dead last in everything. I got stomped. It was bad. I was 170 pounds on stage at 5'9". I had no appreciable muscle mass, and my conditioning was not as good as it could have been. So what was my goal after that? My goal after that, if I were to say, going from that to say, I want to turn pro, that's foolish. That's delusional. That's not good goal setting. What is good goal setting is, my goal after that was, okay, I want to grow. I want to put on muscle mass. I want to get better at bodybuilding. Not even competing, better at bodybuilding. So that was the first step. And then once I added on a decent amount of tissue, what was my next goal? My next goal then was to look at another competition and have the goal of just placing. And thankfully, and I would say thankfully, but I did the work, I placed pretty well at my second show. So that's a small victory, right? Now, my next goal, rinse and repeat. Get better at bodybuilding. Competition can only be a thought once the body is built. So now I'm in an off-season growing phase. Growth mindset definitely applies to what I'm doing right now. I have to add more. I have to become more of what I already am. I have to improve on weaknesses. I have to improve on strengths. Just have to get better, which is kind of like I said, a bit of a gray area goal, but for me that works. I don't have weight goals, right? Because that's a whole other thing where people put on way too much weight way too quickly and just get fat. But I digress. My goal once I have achieved this goal of putting on a sizable amount of tissue, is going to be, okay, I placed well at my second show. I want to win the novice at my third show. Or I want to win, I think if you're able to win a novice, you're probably in the running to win the open for that division as well in your class. So I want to win the novice and maybe win my class, right? And then, if everything goes super well, maybe I do win the overall there. Maybe I don't. So then that would be my next goal after another, rinse and repeat of growing would be, okay, now I want to win the overall. After that, again, rinse and repeat, build the body. After that, the process would be, okay, we did well at a state level show. Was it a good quality state show? Because shows are different. So you see how I'm kind of adding on and on and on and on, and I'm not even talking about a pro qualifier show yet. There's 10, 15, 20 goals, little victories that I can set up for myself before I'm even thinking about stepping on a national stage. And for me, I love that because I'm just checking off boxes, win, 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 win. It's really good for me personally to help keep that fire alive, like I talked about in the first episode. Looking down at my notes. So basically that is how I would apply setting those small goals, setting those expectations to my life personally. As far as the growth mindset goes, I think that pretty much covers it. You have to have a white belt mentality, always be willing to learn and improve in any way at all. You have to not get ahead of yourself with the growth mindset and keep it to these realistic, small incremental goals that add up to big goals. And you have to be consistent. I think this is the last thing, actually. If you're not consistent in what you're pursuing, how can you expect to grow, right? We have to be consistent, especially in bodybuilding. Bodybuilding is 24/7, 365. Every bite of food, every drop of water you drink, every wink of sleep you get, every step of cardio you take, every rep you move in the gym, all adds up. That's not even little victories, that's microscopic victories, right? Because let's say you're doing a set of hack squat, okay? And you are on rep 6, okay? It's getting hard. It sucks. Everything burns. You want to stop. But you know physically, not your mind, you know physically, you probably got another rep or two in the tank, right? If you stop there, you failed. You didn't achieve failure. You achieved next to nothing from that set because you did not give everything that you have. And that's something that I'm truly starting to apply to my training, is getting every single rep I can out of a set, out of a workout. This adds up so much, because think about all those reps you left in the tank, okay? Even if it's just one rep on every exercise. Let's say you have 5 exercises. You're leaving one rep, and let's say you only have one set per exercise to keep it simple. That's 5 sets, right? So that's 5 reps, okay? That's 5 reps that you left on the table. You apply that across the week, and you're getting into the 20 plus reps that you left on the table. You know, depending on the exercise, that's multiple sets worth of reps. You add that up over a year, and you're basically missing entire days of training, right? So this is why consistency is so important. You have to not only be consistent, but you have to be consistent in your output. You can't, you just can't lack that consistency. It's too important in terms of growth and having that mindset for growth. You have to be consistent in all things that you do that are working towards your goal, because it's the only way that you're going to be sure that you're doing everything in your power. And to me, that comes pretty naturally. I've always been a pretty consistent person. When I get my mindset on something, I'm going to do it. But for those of you that struggle with that, I would urge you, take those small victories and just line them up, because I do believe that will help you be more consistent, because it will help keep you more motivated. Because if you don't have that internal motivation, you probably do need some small goals to kind of get you moving in the right direction. And I have found for a lot of people that I've worked with in personal training, that has been big. You know, when it comes to diet, you don't need to go from eating Red Baron pizzas and Uncrustables to chicken and rice, right? That's what I would recommend you do. But if that seems impossible to you, you're not going to be able to stick to that. You're not going to be consistent with that, right? So incremental victories can apply here as well. Let's switch the Red Baron pizza for chicken tenders. At least you're getting protein now. Let's switch the Uncrustables for sourdough bread, natural peanut butter, and sugar-free jelly, something like that. Small wins. And then you can eventually start switching more and more over. You can switch those chicken tenders to chicken tenderloins, and switch the breading for maybe like some type of, I'm pretty sure they have like keto panko that you could put on those chicken tenders and make it work. But that, besides the point, you can incrementally change so that it's not too overwhelming at first. And again, with that goal setting, I do think that's where a lot of that issue is because these people set these huge goals, they're not able to achieve them, so they get overwhelmed and they stop. So it may sound like I'm trying to crush your dreams when I'm saying, don't have these big goals, but really I'm just trying to get the message across that these big dreams are okay to have, but they're not going to get you anywhere. These small incremental goals will allow you to actually see measurable progress and kind of lead you into that one big goal, right? So I think that pretty much covers the growth mindset. A bit of rambling, but I think basically, so long as you're consistent, as long as you set good goals, as long as you're always willing to learn and improve, that's a growth mindset, and you're going to get where you need to be. So last thing I want to talk about is just kind of my plans moving forward into 2025. We're a little over the halfway mark here now, folks. Man, this year's flown by. I can't even believe it. It's been crazy. The first quarter of my year was consumed by competition, and then this second quarter has been all about growth, and I'm going to finish it out with growth as well. So my goals for the rest of this 2025 here is just to continue to improve, continue to get better, continue to make these small incremental improvements in my physique and myself, and just going about that in the best way that I know how. I just recently started working with a new coach here, and that has also kind of lit the fire in me. I'm super, super excited to see where that leads. I think it's a really positive direction in my life. I think that's going to be great. And that coach is actually somebody I mentioned earlier, Joseph Percher. Super, super excited to see what we're able to do, the way everything is lined out. And, he also kind of does set small incremental goals for me. We have the whole year lined up. And what that leads to is the goal is to actually compete in August of next year. So 2025 is going to be all about growth. One of the reasons I wanted to talk about the growth mindset today, because that's pretty much what the rest of my year is going to look like. Slamming food, training as hard as I can. If you follow the Instagram, you're going to see my training program put together by Joseph. My diet, I'm putting up a full day of eating as well. You're going to see that. But yeah, I'm super excited to see what the rest of 2025 holds for me. It's been an amazing year so far. I cannot wait to finish it out strong. So that being said, I think I want to go ahead and wrap up today's podcast. A bit of a shorter one. Not necessarily a bad thing. Again, we're getting used to the new format here. I hope you all enjoyed staring at my ugly mug for however long this podcast was. And again, big thank you to Iron Rebel and Granite Nutrition for sponsoring the show, sponsoring me as an affiliate. You can use code Anson10 to save on your order. And yeah, this has been the Iron Obsession Podcast. Thank you for watching.